Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we're building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of 5 to 10 episodes every couple months. This season is all about how to DAO. How do you start DAOs? How do you engage with DAOs? How do you interact in a post-DAO world? Myself and my co-author, Punkar, have written a book called How to DAO.xyz. And this season, we're going to be talking to many leaders in the DAO era about how they DAO and how they see the DAO ecosystem evolving. If you want to learn more about the podcast, you can visit our website at greenpilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled Book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local GreenPilled.network chapter. Today on the show, I've got Sreeram from EigenLayer on the show, and we are talking about coordination acceleration-ism. So basically, Sreeram is the founder of EigenLayer, formerly a researcher and professor at the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at University of Washington. His work spans information theory, machine learning, blockchain systems, and computational biology. Sreeram is a co-founder of EigenLayer, a project that's focused on decentralized trust in economic security and blockchain systems. He has contributed significantly to the development of the Ethereum ecosystem, and EigenLayer is poised to redefine how projects interact with decentralized trust in the next era of the ecosystem. What does that mean? We get into that in this episode with Sreeram. We talk about EigenLayer, what it is, the opportunity that it offers to builders in the world, and then we zoom out and we talk about Sreeram's thesis on coordination acceleration. Basically, you'll have to listen to the episode to find out. I think this is a really good one, and I think you're going to enjoy this episode with Sreeram. Hi, Sreeram. How you doing?
Hey, hi, Kevin. Really excited to be here on the Greenpill podcast.
Glad to have you on the Greenpill podcast. Maybe we'll start with what you do. So what is EigenLayer?
Yeah, myself, I'm Sreeram. I started this project called EigenLayer now 3.5 years back. Used to be a professor at the University of Washington, Seattle. EigenLayer is a mechanism to supply decentralized trust to arbitrary new networks that can be built on top. So if you look at what is crypto and what is non-crypto and try to draw a line, if you added decentralized verifiable trust to something, you would say that's crypto. If you remove decentralized trust from something, you would say that's not crypto. So you can think of decentralized trust as the raw material out of which the entire crypto economy is created. And so if you think about blockchains like Ethereum, which is where we build, what they do is they take this source of decentralized trust and then channel it, supply it in one particular way, which is, hey, you built blocks, so there's this idea of block space, which is nodes come to consensus, they stake, they provide some kind of security, and then they come to consensus, and then they run an execution environment on top of which anybody can build and deploy new applications. This is a very specific form of supplying the trust. So you take this crude oil of like decentralized trust, refine it all the way through the process, and then create this refined product called block space, which is what everybody else consumes. The way we think about it is like decentralized trust, given in its most raw manner, is actually useful for people in actually building new kinds of networks, which are different from the constraints imposed by any specific particular blockchain. So that was the kind of notion of EigenLayer, Eigen in German for your own layer. Anybody should be able to come and build their own layer on top of this common source of decentralized trust. So that's the core idea.
In my preparation for this episode, there's two parallels to EigenLayer that I came across in my research. The first is Vitalik realizing that people should be able to launch smart contracts without bootstrapping a whole miner network, and that was Ethereum, a general purpose smart contract platform. And then the other analogy that came up, I think it was in your podcast with Bankless, was the analogy to all the different apps on AWS, decentralized storage, decentralized compute, decentralized messaging, and things like that, being sort of like a general purpose cloud utilities, and the AVSs on EigenLayer sort of being like general purpose apps that will be built on top of EigenLayer. So taking something that was single purpose, Ethereum's trust being used for block space, and making it general purpose so that any builder can access the billions of dollars of capital on Ethereum is kind of what EigenLayer enables. Is that too reductionist? Are those good parallels to you?
Yeah, those are awesome. One way to like specifically look at from the crypto point of view is any blockchain is comprised of, you can say, different layers. And the base layer is some security, it's either staking or mining. And then you have consensus, nodes come to consensus in some way. And then on top of which is execution, some execution environment is running, on top of which some applications are running. And you can think of Bitcoin as basically totally vertically integrating all these four things. It's a particular form of security with a particular form of consensus, with a particular form of execution environment, with a particular application, which is send and receive Bitcoins. And like you said, what Ethereum did is to blow up like the top level, say that, hey, here is a fixed set of like security, consensus, execution, but anybody can build applications on top. So that was kind of like the Ethereum paradigm. And I would say like what the roll-up centric era on Ethereum became is now open innovation. So I think of like this as like a progressive deepening of the landscape of open innovation, where people can come in and innovate without themselves having to build the trust. And so any application builder on top of Ethereum could just come and deploy on this like, smart contract platform. And then of course, all the other L1s kind of followed step on Ethereum's like direction. But Ethereum took the next step, actually. Like, this is really surprising that a platform can actually evolve, in this manner. And the next step was to say, oh, it's not just anybody can come and build applications. Anybody can build execution environments on top. And that's really the roll-up centric roadmap, because I can just run my own execution environment and prove it back to Ethereum that I did it correctly. And so now like anybody can build new execution environments. That's next level of deepening of open innovation. But still what we find there is that the consensus is still determined by Ethereum, the one blockchain, and the particular way in which consensus happens there. Any scaling trade-offs that you've made are now inherited by all systems. All rollups built on top have to write data to Ethereum DA and all this stuff. So you can think of the next phase of open innovation is open up the consensus also. There's only a common zone of security. Security comes from stake, and stake is a really powerful form of supplying security because you can apply both the positive incentives and the negative incentives to the people participating in these various protocols. So now with EigenLayer, you have innovation at the level of consensus, at the level of execution, at the level of applications. And, we built this on top of Ethereum. So now like all the ETH stake and here the ERC20s and other kinds of like, representations of economic value can be used inside this platform.
It's all really incredible to see the growth of this ecosystem. And I'm curious about what your favorite AVS ideas are and what are the coolest things that you've seen built in and around EigenLayer. I know you probably don't want to pick any winners or something, but I just want to plant in the listener's mind an example of an AVS. What is an AVS and what are some favorite examples of them?
The one way to think about it is you can say like, oh, run a new consensus chain on top of like this stake. And I think that's a simple idea. But actually, I think the better way of thinking about it is as services. So that's why we call them AVSs. Originally, we were thinking of AVS as actively validated services. We are reorienting the abbreviation as autonomous verifiable services. Autonomous, they run on their own. Anybody can come and stake and run the service. Verifiable, so because anybody is running, you need to make sure that they're verified post facto using some kind of on-chain slashing contracts and conditions. And so that's the category of autonomous verifiable services, a service built on top of EigenLayer. So what might these services be? First category we started with is, can we complement the roll-up centric roadmap of Ethereum, right? So, roll-ups are coming up. Oh, I want to decentralize a sequencer. Okay, maybe I just create a consensus group on EigenLayer and then run it. And, you can decentralize your sequencer. You want to have super fast bridging across rollups. As long as there is enough economic stake on a bridge, the bridge can pass messages across different rollups easily. You want to do some kind of MEV management. If you are a decentralized network, that basically makes sure that ordering is done in some fixed, a priori agreed manner. That's another example. Data availability, you're normally publishing data on top of Ethereum, which is the most secure form of data availability, but you may need much higher throughput. So, you can use a data availability service built on EigenLayer. We ourselves built one called EigenDA. So EigenDA's data throughput, just as a kind of like example, is at 15 megabytes per second, whereas Ethereum's like 33 kilobytes per second. So you have like, a couple of orders of magnitude difference there. EigenDA is built on top of like the ideas of the Ethereum roadmap, dark sharding. So we took the dark sharding roadmap, and because now like we're just like a small startup team, we can actually just move much faster than Ethereum, just to move very carefully. And so provides a layer of acceleration and innovation to Ethereum. So these are examples of the roll-up centric roadmap and how EigenLayer services complement it. Then you can move to, maybe it's not just a roll-up centric roadmap. Maybe there are all kinds of other things. And one category I'm particularly excited about is called coprocessors. Vitalik recently wrote this article called Glue and Coprocessor. So Ethereum EVM could be the glue, and then on top of which you can run like arbitrary services as coprocessors on top. And you can have two kinds of coprocessors. One is something that runs the thing off chain and then proves it using zero knowledge proofs that you're actually doing it correctly. Or you could have crypto economic games, which make sure that like the people who are doing it correctly. It's the same like optimistic versus ZK type trade-off. And what kinds of things could be built in this crypto economic, coprocessors? You could build AI. Okay, so this is like now the big deal. A lot of people know, you also did a recent episode on AI. This is something that we're very passionate about. When you think about AI, you want to make sure that AI is verifiable when you bring the output on chain. And if your AI is not verifiable, it's not interesting. So, you can run an AI off chain, but bring it on chain in a verifiable manner. You can run, other kinds of off chain processes. Like I want to run a database, I want to run SQL, I want to run a game off chain, but bring the results on chain. I want to run some ZK proving, all kinds of interesting things. So that's another category. Another category is, these cryptographic services. I want to store a secret on this decentralized network where I don't let any one node have all the secret. I split it into small chunks and spread them through the network. So this is like secret sharing, secure multi-party computation, these kinds of networks. We have several of these being built on EigenLayer. Fully homomorphic encryption. I want to do computation on top of encrypted data. I don't want to do computation on raw text. I want to do computation directly on encrypted data. And you can do that. So we have a few of those. Trusted execution environments, hardware encryption, right? So hardware is guaranteeing that you're running inside some, protected hardware, which you cannot leak the secrets outside. So that's another category. So each of these, actually, like it's really interesting. Like 1.5 years back, I just gave a presentation showing all these different categories. And now, like for each one, there is more than one player building on EigenLayer. So it's kind of like amazing to see that. One other like really interesting category is some kind of proofs, right? Proofs not like zero knowledge proofs or computation proofs, but proofs of other attributes. One example is proof of a location, right? So in the whole crypto economy is decentralized trust, but one aspect of decentralized is geographic decentralization. How do I testify to a network where I am on the world? Like, can I prove to a network that I'm in a certain location? And so how would you do that? Just like in a GPS, right? So you basically have nodes trying to like send you information, and depending on the latency of how fast the information goes and comes back, you can deduce where the node is. And if you can do that in an adversary resistant manner, even if some nodes are giving you adversarial answers, together there are enough nodes to give you the right information. So that's a proof of location service. So proof of location, proof of humanity. So this is another category which is popping up on EigenLayer quite a bit. ZKTLS, right, which is web proofs. So normally when you think of an oracle, you're reading data from the internet into the blockchain, but this data is public. But the data may be under my login, right? Like this is pretty much all of the most interesting data on the internet is under my login. As an example, I'm an Uber driver and I want to move to a new ride sharing network. I built up over 3 years like a 4.9 rating on Uber, and I want to bring it to a new platform. But no, Uber controls my data and says like, hey, I'm not going to send that information to somebody else. But, if you think of it from a user-owned perspective, the user should be able to prove to this new network that that's really what is happening, that I actually have this 4.9 rating from Uber. This is very difficult to do, and there are like protocols on EigenLayer, several of them. actually giving you the ability to do this, which I think is a huge transformation because, in crypto, we talk a lot about like the users should own the data. But normally I used to think this is only possible going forward, right? New systems that are being built can have this property. But what we are able to do is to take your data from Web2 and bring it in a manner that you own it yourself. I think that's a huge, one of the things we talk a lot about inside like the EigenLayer ecosystem is how do you vampire attack the whole cloud, right? So you can bring all of that into this crypto self-owned rails. Yeah, so that's an overview of the different categories on EigenLayer.
Thanks for that. I want to move out of the what does EigenLayer do? I think that's been covered in a lot of different places across the ecosystem, and start moving into more greenpill questions. And I think that there's sort of an interesting intersection of my work and your work, and I'm curious to find it and to pull some of those threads and kind of play jazz a little bit together on top of it. And so the way I'm going to tee off that section of the conversation is, why are we here? What are we building towards? What's the why behind the what?
Yeah, this is for me the first kind of time that I got interested in crypto was when I related that this idea of Yuval Harari in his *Sapiens* says humans are special not because we are intelligent, but because we cooperate flexibly in large numbers. And so this became like a very important pivotal thing for me, and actually like changed a lot of my personal understanding of how things work in the world. And as I was thinking about it, and you see like the friction to cooperation is trust, right? So I cooperate with you if I know I can trust you. And if we can solve trust, then we create this emergent large scale cooperation, which is a crazy, crazy, upgrade for humanity. So this became my operating thesis for why, crypto. Just like the internet became the information superhighway, crypto could be our coordination superhighway. And so this is a crazy, interesting, superb like view for what crypto should be. And I had at that time not discovered a lot of like, Kevin, your work and the Ethereum work on coordination. This was just like coming from somewhere else. And I like, okay, if this is the main thing, then coordination is, cooperation, coordination, mechanisms for coordination are actually like really valuable. So I was almost operating kind of out of and on my own theses without actually like having a rich intersection. It's really only 3 years back that I discovered all the rich work that had been going on in the Ethereum ecosystem. And that, actually there's like a large thriving culture around like taking the idea of like how to build better coordination systems and then express it. And like there's this big, community and movement, some of which you lead here, Kevin, really excited to discover that. And I'd say like this may be the dominant reason I chose to build in the Ethereum ecosystem, because, it's like when you have a shared vision, anybody who builds more coordination, I'm happy. Like I don't have to be the guy to do it. Somebody else is doing it. That's even better, because together we can accelerate this much faster. So that's how I really got into like the Ethereum thing. This was around like 2022, January, February, around Denver. And I first time realized, actually these guys care exactly about the things that we had some very high level theses, but like they're actually trying to implement it. So that was a big realization for me. And starting from that, I've been looking at where is the concrete manifestation? Where is right now, like where is this coordination actually happening inside crypto, and where can we actually take it to accelerate it? So that's kind of like the overarching structure. And over these like not just 3 years that I've been building EigenLayer, but over the last 7-8 years I've been working on crypto, I've been refining this one like a model that kind of informs all my work. And I call this the coordination innovation model. So what is the idea here? The idea is any kind of like a successful large scale system, like, let's take the United States as an example, like has an underlying layer of coordination, like the Constitution, the government, and a layer of innovation that enables a layer of innovation on top, right? Like the free market where people can exchange goods and services to each other. And this free market is created fundamentally because the coordination layer the Constitution, assures things like property rights. Because now by taking that out, making credible commitments that if you own a property, you own a property. Now anybody else can trade rights to that property and like create value and move that around really easily on top of the free market. So there is a layer of coordination underpinning a layer of innovation. And so this was the starting point. And, when we start thinking about, you talk a lot about positive sum, non-zero sum games. And if you think about it, I think fundamentally there are only two archetypal non-zero sum games. Non-zero sum games are those where like all players win, right? It's not coming out of a win-lose game. And when you think about what are the possible archetypal games, I think there are only really two. Like one is innovation, where you invent something from nothing. And the other one is coordination, where N people come together and do something more than the sum of the parts. And so coordination and innovation are these two like non-zero sum games. And they are actually nested fractally, one on top of the other. So you can think of like even going back to like evolutionary timescale, you would see something like when you had these, before you have like these multicellular organisms, you have inside a cell, the first time you have a specialization into a nucleus and a mitochondria. And a mitochondria is like specializing in energy production, nucleus specializing in information propagation. But these two are coordinating. So coordination at that scale leads to innovation. Innovation as multicellular organisms. So you see this in the long arc of history, evolutionary history, that actually new coordination systems arise and then new innovation gets built. And then out of which emerges a new coordination system, and then you go on. So if you plot like progress over an evolutionary timescale, you see like, I say this, that innovation is evolutionary, like you build on top of each other's innovation, and coordination is revolutionary. Because coordination systems rarely arise, because coordination requires a binding commitment from N parties, and different parties have to come together in order to accept, agree, opt in to a new coordination system. That's why it's very, very, very difficult to build new coordination systems. Not because, they are inherently hard, but because they require convergence and opt in. And so coordination systems are rare to arise and even harder to mutate if they're not, those covenants are not built in. And this is, explained to me like, for example, what happened with Bitcoin. Bitcoin arose as this new coordination system for like, permissionless money. But it's so hard to mutate it. Like, before I got into like actually building EigenLayer, I was like, hey, here's a new consensus protocol. Can we get Bitcoin to use it? And then I didn't understand like how hard it is to mutate a coordination system. It's very, very, very difficult. So the thesis is, there is layers of societal evolutionary progress even is made out of like, layers of innovation and then new layer of coordination arising on top, and then which enables, encourages new layers of innovation built on top. And then these are fractally nested. And all these different agents kind of compete with each other to actually create this like net growth engine. And so, and then I saw that, if we can actually, and seeing Bitcoin and Ethereum kind of be born before our eyes, so to say, over the last decade, gives us confidence that, maybe this game's not over. Like it's possible to build new coordination systems and create them so that those are really powerful, useful for all the people. They serve all the people that are building on top. EigenLab's own vision is to build humanity's coordination engine. So this is our goal. It's nothing to do with restaking or even staking or, building decentralized networks. It's about to create humanity's coordination engine. That's our dominant value. And out of which we just found one small thing to do to begin with. And that was what was restaking.
Beautiful. I'm a coordination maximalist, so this is all music to my ears. Just to play that back for the audience, there's layers of societal innovation that took coordination to get, and then built new coordination substrates for the generations that came after them. And we take some of them for granted. By the way, we're recording this over one of those coordination layers, TCP/IP and the internet. And so there's these layers of innovation on top of innovation. You can almost think of those like layers of sediment, and they're fractally nested on top of each other. And each generation sort of pushes forward the amount of hyper complexity, the amount of processes that civilization needs to do in order to process its information and its resource allocation. And you have identified that trust is a limiter in doing that. And EigenLayer's sort of the big leverage point of EigenLayer is decentralizing trust, making it easier to tap giant pools of trust. And that's in service of building humanity's coordination engine. And that's your most dominant value. Did I play that back for the audience in a way you'd agree with?
Absolutely.
Got it.
Yeah. So when you think about coordination, I have this equation I call coordination is equal to communication plus commitment. Okay. So I know you think of is what are coordination systems? Coordination systems require the ability for n parties to first communicate with each other easily, right? Like the internet is our communication superhighway, so I can actually communicate with you because of the internet. But what is missing is the ability for us to enter into binding commitments, right? So I want to do a commitment that, something happens, then, for example, this podcast output we share equally or something. How do we do that? How do we enter into these kinds of binding commitments? The internet didn't have a native substrate to do it. When you think of commitments and who makes and keeps, how do you keep or enforce commitments? This is like the really important bottleneck of like coordination systems is who keeps the commitments, who enforces the commitments, how can we trust them? So one way to, taxonomy you can think of commitments is on the most historically like dominant one was authority enforced commitments, right? So a single authority like a king comes and they enforce commitments. And for example, they say like write a deed and say that Kevin owns this house, this whatever, and like they honor it, right? So you can have a authority enforced commitments. You can have a committee enforced commitments, like some party like the CCP comes together and decides like, how much like something needs to happen, right? Even in the US, you see something like the Federal Reserve is a committee that decides like monetary policy. You have committees that make major decisions. So like committee-based enforcement systems, another lever. Like the thing is, committees are more robust than authorities, but committees are plagued with, what is the incentive of the committee? Like, does it diverge from the incentive of everybody? What is the selection bias inherent in the committee? Like, is it representative in some way? Like, so you have these kinds of problems that go into the committee-based enforcement. Then you go to the next level is majority-based enforcement, like a pure democracy. Like a group of people come together and they vote and they make some decisions. But even in a majority-based commitment, there is a tyranny of the majority. A majority can screw a minority, like arbitrarily. And all of us are minorities in some way or the other, right? Like if you slice and dice, across different axes, everybody's a minority. So there's a tyranny of majority that goes in with like majority enforced commitments. Then you ask, what is the deepest, most robust, rigid system of commitments? And we call it self-enforcing commitments that just enforce themselves. And, it's mind-boggling concept in some like very fundamental way that that's even possible. And I think historically, it's worth thinking about what those kinds of commitments were. And for example, when you had countries, back to the ancient days of kings, and countries had to trade with each other. A king cannot trust another king or another king's committee or another kingdom's majority to like trade with each other. So you had to find some resource, some mechanism. If I am trading across the trust boundary, which is kingdoms in ancient days, and if I'm trading across the trust boundary, I need to be holding value, do value transfer, which is self-enforcing. And I think out of this pressure, evolutionary pressure, arose something like gold or kind of like these kinds of rare metals as like a mechanism to trade. Because when you give me a piece of gold, it's self-verifiable to me. Like that's a piece of gold because I know what gold is. And that serves as a value transfer commitment because now I can then like pass it along and no king, no committee, no majority can say that's not gold, right? Because it's self-verifiable. And so this became the bedrock of, I think, the modern economy is because gold could transact across trust boundaries. It's a self-enforcing value transfer commitment. So you created this like really powerful self-enforcing system, back in the day. But the thing with gold is just like, Bitcoin is modern version of gold. It's purely just value transfer. Like I can just give you value transfer. It's not value assignment, right? Value assignment would be like to come and say, hey, if A and B and C and C things happen, then I get this much amount of value, then you get this much amount of value. It's much more expressive, and gold is not. And so what we saw is going from there to all kinds of complex things. I would say the modern version of this is something like the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is almost self-enforcing. It's not exactly self-enforcing, but it's almost self-enforcing. Because when somebody, comes and tries to claim power and they violate the Constitution, the kind of like the immune system, wakes up and it's like, oh my God, like this is a violation of the constitutional rights, all this stuff. And I think in between era, religious texts actually served this purpose, because even if you're a king, you're not above the religious text. Like a religious text kind of like lives on its own merit. And, kings used to like sometimes distort religious texts to their advantages, but at least you had to comply to something that you can't like unilaterally violate. So I think of like self-enforcing systems went through like three phases before crypto. Like you had the gold era, you had the religious era, you had the constitution era. Constitution is a distillation of the coordination elements of religion. You just take the coordination elements and then like just write it down into like a constitution. And so that's the constitution. And what I think of as crypto is accelerating the self-enforcing nature of coordination systems. So that's the next era. I'd love to like, talk a little bit, hear your perspective on how you think about these different versions of coordination systems.
Yeah. Again, beautiful. And I can't wait to re-listen to this when I'm not a deer in the headlights hosting the episode and I'm actually, listening as I walk through the woods, which is where I listen to podcasts these days. But what I heard there, let me just play it back and then I'll react to it. So we're building humanity's coordination engine, and coordination equals communication plus commitment. Now we can enter into binding commitments with smart contracts that are self-reinforcing. There's been a history of how we've done commitments, and that's been through the gold era, the religious era, and then the constitution era. And now we're sort of entering the on-chain era of commitments. Did I play that back? Good.
Amazing.
Okay, cool. So for me, I've actually pivoted a lot of my like mimetic work in thinking from regen, which is I think what I'm known for. It's like, like good for the world, positive sum games, like Boulder, Colorado hippie kind of stuff, into on-chain capital allocation is the meme that we've been focused on. And capital allocation is a little bit more sharp. It's a little bit more technical. It's sophisticated. It feels more like a power tool, not something that's coming out of, someone playing Frisbee at CU Boulder, which, by the way, I still love Frisbee. I still have these values, but I'm now just like leading with the capital allocation stuff. And it's because I think that capital allocation has been reinvented through history, through the gold era, through the religious era, through the constitution era, from things like just resource sharing networks back in the hunter-gatherer, how we distribute the harvests in the agricultural era, to in the industrial era, how do we shift means of production to be more efficient in batch processing and all that. And so anyway, there's this long change in evolution as society changes, as the coordination substrate changes of how we allocate capital. And I actually think that figuring out the on-chain era of capital allocation is like the layer below how do we solve coordination failure for me, because you have to be able to allocate resources to the things that you want, whether it's growing your company for profit or the regen stuff, the biodiversity support, the climate change, all of that kind of stuff. And so for me, the lens that I bring to this conversation is capital allocation. And now that we have these new ways of decentralizing trust and creating commitments, I think that you can create bounded rules where the problems with human coordination that we've had before no longer exist. You can get around the free rider problem. You can get around the sort of like the tyranny of the majority. Basically, we've got this infinite canvas, which is Ethereum, to build these allocation circuits in order to allocate funding to what matters. Gitcoin's mission is actually fund what matters, and capital allocation is like the how we do that. And I kind of think of like a couple generations ago, Taiwan Semiconductor really got to become a very important systemic part of the economy by etching just circuits into silicon. And now I think there's going to be this next generation of builders that are going to be allocating, like etching circuits, capital allocation circuits onto Ethereum. So Ethereum is sort of like the silicon that we're building these circuits on. And what are the ways in which we can build more positive sum games, more for-profit structures, more just better coordination towards the outcomes we want, using this more efficient and effective medium to do capital allocations. Let's just do the capital allocation on chain. So I'm struggling to end on a question here for you, but what is the intersection of credible commitments and on-chain capital allocation is, I think, where I'd love to play jazz for a couple minutes.
That's an amazing setup, because when you think about capital, right? Capital emerges, I think, out of property rights, right? So what you call capital is that something that has like a clear ownership right attached to it, right? Like, so it's money, it's property, it's like things that you can own. And one of the days, sometime back, I was thinking about what the market economy's action is, and partly the action of the market economy is to convert things without property rights to things with property rights. I'll just stop there and want to take your reaction on it. The function of the market economy, it's not a normative or prescriptive view. It's a descriptive view, right? Like, it's just saying what the market economy is doing is convert things without property rights to things with property rights. First, I want to hear your opinion on it, and then
Yeah. I have two reactions, and they're somewhat divergent from each other, but we can choose our own adventure after I volley them over to you. The first is that I take for granted the rule of law of the United States because it's been my entire life, and I've never known anything different. But if you go back through history and you go to different parts of the world where you don't have property rights, you'll see how different the world is to not be able to own property, and how much that changes the quality of life that people have. So first off, I'm trying just not to take for granted the property rights that allow me to own this computer and to do things and to advance my own well-being through those property rights. The second is a little bit of a divergent take, and that's that I've been pilled on this idea from Gregory Landua called the 8 forms of capital. And basically, the idea is capital isn't just financial capital. It's actually intellectual capital. It's spiritual capital. It's material capital. It's social capital. And so I think that maybe, having property rights for the financial capital and the financial resources you have enables more retainment of like your intellectual capital, your social capital. I'm sort of taking a stab in the dark here about how property rights would connect to the other different 8 forms of capital. But one of the things that I think is like kind of neat to think about is that this podcast is a form of intellectual capital that we're producing right here. And, one of the things that I think is really cool about crypto is that we can create new ways of financializing social and intellectual capital, and therefore funding what matters, than we ever have before, because now we can turn this podcast into an NFT. By the way, please go to pods.media/greenpill, collect this episode. Sreeram's first time on the episode on the podcast, so maybe worth collecting. But those are my 2 reactions is don't take property rights for granted. And also I think about 8 different types of capital, the 8 forms of capital, not just financial capital.
That's super cool. Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of this, other types of capital that you laid out, like outside of financial capital, come because there is a social mechanism to attribute that back to you, right? Like, people just don't take others' ideas, and then like for example, the distribution mechanism that we have today, which is that, we're just on the internet and throwing this up to like anybody to listen. Is unimaginable 30 years back, because who controls the platform controls who presents the idea, right? Like, you and I may have great ideas, and then but somebody else has the platform, and they'll control they'll relay it as their idea, and so on. And one of the things that we see is, as coordination systems become more expressive, you see that you can specialize, right? Like, as when you think about capital allocation, venture capital as like an example of specialization of capital and ideas and innovation, right? Capital and innovation. So somebody brings capital, somebody brings innovation, ideas, and they can meet and work together to actually create an output, as opposed to having a double coincidence of the guy who has a lot of money also has a lot of ideas. And each one is very unlikely, and like together they become extremely unlikely. So that kind of like, the better the coordination systems that arise, the more like these different forms of capital can, what you're calling capital, the 8 forms of capital, can be coordinated to actually produce useful net outputs. And so better forms of coordination actually enable exactly like what, and maybe this is underneath, and you're articulating this in your upcoming book as well, that this is the idea that you can have new forms of expressive capital allocation, using these on-chain tools is actually going to enable more forms of coordination across these different types of, resources, capital that people actually have.
The one area where I'm really excited to sort of like another look at the intersection between on-chain capital allocation and the EigenLayer ecosystem is that I wrote this post a couple months ago entitled "Restaking is Regen," and basically like the core idea behind that was that restaking creates yield in the form of productive economic activity, sort of like not for free, but like on top of the pool of capital that's already securing the Ethereum network. And there's this idea in nature of things that are exothermic, which basically means that they give off heat. So like an example of that is the sun. All of the life on planet Earth derives energy from the sun or from other sources of heat, like volcanic heat, or in some cases now we have nuclear reactions on Earth, and so this idea of exothermic in nature is related to heat, but there's economically exothermic structures in crypto and in our economy. One of them is Ethereum. I actually run a staker, and so I've got economically exothermic like yield going into my own personal economy from that. But what I'm really excited about is letting 1,000 different experiments that are economically exothermic in the AVS ecosystem flow into these on-chain capital allocation structures and create positive feedback loops. First with like the sorry, you're not calling them AVSs anymore, you're calling them services, but
No,
like
it's still AVSs. Yeah, it's just autonomous verifiable services. But yeah,
sure, yeah, but like, how do we plug in that? Like the thing that you bring to the table that I think we've been looking for is like, I've been funding public goods with dog coins for 4 years, and like much respect to the Akita community, like we love you, thank you for partnering with us, but like I want like yield that is more like ETH or like US dollars that we can plug into these on-chain capital allocation frameworks. And I think that there's an impedance matching. Vitalik said it on his episode, between allocating capital to public goods and raising money for public goods. And you kind of like wholesale solve that problem with EigenLayer. And so, I'm, is restaking regen, what do you think about the connection of these two idea sets together?
Yeah. One of the, like, when we think about strategy, positioning, all this stuff, we have two axes that we think about. Like, the x-axis is like how long-term something is, right? So how deep, intellectual, like, is it actually like something net good, long-term useful, all of that kind of stuff on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we think about, is it friendly to somebody who is in it for the short term? Is it somebody in a financial oriented position? And so, you can think of the y-axis is degen, the x-axis is like just pure positive sum, like good. And I think of like, can we match make these two things? Because mostly great ideas need energy to like take off, right? Some kind of activation energy. And the activation energy can come from this degen part to actually supply it. Because if you're purely in the degen axis, what happens is you are in like a zero sum speculation, right? Like, you just speculate.
PvP.
It's PvP, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you connect that with this, long-term builder, type thinking, what is long-term positive outcomes, then essentially you can bootstrap new systems, new technologies, new things that are net good based on the energy of speculation. And this fits in with another like mental model that I use a lot, is when you have these, you talk a lot about these multipolar traps or like coordination failures, right? So you think of another way of visualizing that is through this landscape of solutions. So you have like x-axis is all possible solutions and y-axis is like how good a solution is. And you have these non-convex problems where you have like a local maxima, like a local hill, but the best solution is like a global hill. But to go from a local maxima to a global maxima, you have to go through a valley, right? Like, and this is the difficult part in like actually solving coordination failures, is you have to get people to compromise their self-interest in order to go to this new global maxima. And I think that is usually a very difficult thing to pull off. And one thing we realized, and I think this is another place where coordination and this capital allocation thesis kind of intersect, is by articulating what the value of the new hill is, what you can do is to to say, hey, if this new hill manifests itself, this global maxima manifests itself, there's this much value. And what I am doing is borrowing from that value and then giving people today so that it's not short term, like net negative, it's actually short term positive. And so what happens is you kind of construct this virtual ramp between this local maxima and that global maxima by borrowing from that future, articulating what that future is and why in that future this thing will be valuable, and then creating this virtual ramp on which you can transport people into that better global maxima. And so this informs a lot of our thinking. And this is, again, like connects to the two axis thesis that I was presenting earlier. Just find a global maxima and then find the pathway where you can actually use the tools of finance and capital allocation to actually like balance, to construct this ramp. And, if I was saying earlier about this coordination innovation thesis, that coordination systems are very hard to arise, right? And they're hard to arise precisely because of this like valley problem that you have to cross from one societal equilibrium to another societal equilibrium. You have to go through a valley, which is not individually rational to do. And nominally, we appeal to altruism to like act through this valley. But the problem is only a very small fraction of people can actually, are even in a position because of all the constraints, to act purely in an altruistic manner. Whereas if we can actually make it a win-win for all of the parties, then you actually can construct. And the idea of a capital, the economic system, as a mechanism to express that is, I think, really powerful. So you can actually solve pretty much any coordination failure, not just using all the technologies and tools of commitments that we are talking about, but also by leveraging the financial economic instruments of borrowing from the future, which is a really powerful idea. And one way it manifests in crypto is people give tokens to bootstrap all the different sides of their marketplace. What's the token? The token is a representation of the value of this potential future. If the network manifests itself, it actually has some value. And you're able to give a portion of that ownership, a portion of that value. Initially, the valley is really steep, like you may just fall off and die. So you give an excess, you need a lot of boost in the initial period to actually compensate for the risk that people are taking. And then you have to balance it out over time. So that's another place, I think, where the coordination thesis and the capital allocation thesis kind of like come together, which is by understanding this landscape, by being able to articulate the value of the future of this coordination system, where that value is shared more equitably, and taking a portion of the value from that to compensate for the risk takers to actually opt in to like a new coordination system. I think we can actually transport people from one local maxima to the global maxima.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a visual diagram of this, and if you're watching on YouTube, hopefully our editor Keystone can put it up. But basically, the visual that I think is in both of our mind's eye right now is this idea of a search space, where the x-axis is all of the different like capital allocation constructions or coordination constructions that could be out there, and then the y-axis is how effective are they at solving some problem, creating value for something. And basically, what we are in is a decentralized search space in order to find the best structures for solving the problems that exist in coordination. And if the industrial or like the internet era structure is like yay big, then the on-chain search space is much bigger, because now we have credible commitments through smart contracts. We have EigenLayer and this big pool of decentralized trust that is the Ethereum network. And so we're kind of like going off of the map of what's already been discovered by existing economics and into it's like when you go into Zelda and you discover a new area and you get the map for that area. We're kind of like going into this world of credible commitments and on-chain capital allocation and yield and all those kind of things, and just trying to figure out what is the best construction for coordinating human activity in the 21st century. And another thing I heard there is that different agents will have different reward functions. And one of the things we can do with credible commitment is bind our individual good, what's good for us, with group good at a local, statewide and global level, binding those incentives by making it more attractive to solve problems together. I think is like one way that we get to that 3-3, we get to that coordinate square. And so hopefully the visuals on the YouTube can help, but I think it's a really exciting distributed search problem is to figure out how we come up with a construction that can accelerate coordination, build the coordination superhighway, as you said about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah. One of the most exciting things we can be doing anywhere. And, going back to this coordination innovation thesis, one thing you can think of, and it's probably on top of a lot of people's mind is, hey, there is this whole AI era coming up. And, you just did an episode on this, right? So this AI era coming up. And how does, all of this crypto stuff fit in with that? And the coordination innovation thesis actually tells us like something really insightful there. If you think of innovation, AI is like the accelerant for innovation, right? AI is innovation acceleration. Innovation is any one individual can actually like do some action, improve themselves. And AI is really, really powerful in that dimension. And crypto is coordination acceleration, right? So you can think of the extremal point of innovation acceleration is AI. The extremal point of coordination acceleration is crypto. So now like that informs me like how these structures will interact with each other, that like what sets of things and interesting new things can happen in the future. And the question that is really interesting in on that side is like, what is going to be that big thing that happens when these two structures interact with each other, AI and crypto? So that could be like a really interesting next topic for conversation. So if you think about this like a picture of, hey, progress happening evolutionarily and, just keeps increasing. And then suddenly there's a bump due to coordination, and then progress keeps happening evolutionarily. And then suddenly there's a bump due to coordination. Another way of asking this question is like, what is the next big bump in coordination? What is it going to do? And, when we like had the vision for Eigen Labs as like to build humanity's coordination engine, it's like, okay, crypto is humanity's coordination engine. Let's just go accelerate it. Let's go make it more expressive. Let's go make it, do more things. And now with this view, which is, innovation is maximally accelerated by AI, what is it that crypto can do to like kind of move this picture forward? There is a lot, I think, to happen on this intersection where crypto serves as the coordination substrate for AI. So we were talking earlier about like coordination is communication plus commitments, and crypto can kind of like can make and keep self-enforcing commitments. So when you think about the commitments and how like commitments can be made in the AI era, you can think of two broad categories of commitments, or maybe three broad categories. Commitments that humans can make to AIs, okay, and commitments that AIs can make to AIs, and commitments that AIs can make to humans. And of course, already like we're talking about commitments humans can make to humans, right? So there's just four possible combinations there: humans and AIs, right? Human to human, human to AI, AI to human, and AI to AI. And like each of these actually are something interesting and rich to think about. If you think about the human commitments to AI, right? Like right now, what's happening with AI agents is mostly people are running agents on their server and then calling it a kind of autonomous AI agent, right? And if you wear a kind of like a decentralization maxi crypto hat, you're like, man, this is stupid. This sucks, right? Like it's just some guy running their server. So I have this picture where I say like an agent controlling an Ethereum wallet is not very different from an agent controlling a Stripe API. It's kind of the same thing, right? Like if you run it on a server, it's exactly the same thing, right? Because, it's just like it's doing some call to your bank, it's doing some call to your Ethereum wallet. So there's no real kind of foundational difference if both of them are, controlled by an individual. When things become different is when the AI itself runs like a smart contract on chain, right? I should be able to just go and say, oh, just like I run an Ethereum smart contract, I should be able to run an AI smart contract, right? Like the output should be as correct and rigid as writing a smart contract. Then you suddenly have like unleashed a new world of possibilities, right? Where you can say, oh, just write arbitrary AI programs, they run on chain and their output is as rigid, as correct, as accurate as running an on chain contract. Then this AI is controlled by nobody, just like a contract is controlled by nobody. We've been like thinking about what this future kind of beckons, where you have new forms of on-chain life, right? We're calling it AI life, right? And the idea is, when you think about, people think about AI as like, okay, this crazy new thing is going to come up. How does this? Some AI safety people have, for example, worried a lot about like, oh, AI takes off and does its own thing. Like, how do you keep it under control? All of this kind of stuff. But there's no known like clear takeoff mechanism where like it just goes and be its own thing, right? Like maybe a robot which is self-replicating, and controls a city. Something like that could be like an example. But those are far away, right? Like today, we still have AIs purely digital. Can a purely digital AI be its own thing, be its own life, right? And we think of something like what is the units of life. You think of there's a unit of information like DNA, right? For a living thing, controlling a unit of energy like ATP, like mitochondria produces ATP, which is the unit of energy in a living thing. It's self-directed, like a living system has its own, that DNA controls that unit of energy, not other things. And finally, it's adaptable, right? So it adapts to the environment. So these are the kind of like basic building blocks of a living thing. And what we see is, if you think of an AI agent run on your server, it has a unit of information, which is its intelligence. It has a unit of energy. I think of money, capital, as a unit of energy because it can go and do action in the real world, right? So it has a unit of energy. It is not self-directed. It's not ultimately self-directed because you can switch off the dang thing and then like it's not self-directed. So it's not a new form of life or like, oh, the agent did it. No, you are doing it. You just like have a computer that is doing it on your behalf, right? So that's number 3, right? It's not self-directed. Number 4, it's adaptable, intelligent, right? And of course, these agents can be very intelligent. So I think so that's like a open AI agent, I would put it in this category. A DAO, I would put it as like checking off the first 3 boxes, right? It's a unit of information is code, right? It's controlling a unit of energy, which is money, and it's self-directed because the on-chain property rights enforces itself correctly. But it's not that adaptive internally or just as a DAO itself. So the adaptation is coming from the agents, the members controlling the DAO, actually like exerting their power, which is great. But that's not a form of life by itself. It's just a coordination mechanism for these units of people coming together. So what I think would completely transform this is if you had on-chain AI contracts, right? So then you have a unit of information, which is this AI code, controlling this money, which is on-chain, using on-chain property rights, and it's adaptable because as it learns, it just keeps improving itself. So this, I think, is going to be like a huge shift in this intersection between crypto and AI. It's the extremal form of this autonomous AI agent thesis. So we are calling this AI life, it's like now a living form. It's like a living, it's like a life form because it undergoes evolution just like any other life form. It has its unit of money, and then just like any life persists till it's an energy surplus, right? You should be able to harvest more energy than you spend, then you're, in net energy positive and you can continue going on. And then when you cannot harvest any more energy, then you die, right? Like this AI agent is afloat till you have net money surplus. And then once you don't have net money surplus, you just die, right? And that forces a unit of evolution on top of it and creates this like really interesting, open-ended, novel process through which these agents can evolve and be created. So this is a crazy new thesis that we're working on and like trying to build some of the core components to actually enable this.
Let me just play some of this back to bring the audience along. So basically, we were talking in our last exchange about the search space of how to like maximally accelerate coordination, and I said that we expanded the search space by adding credible commitments with crypto vastly, and now we're exploring the search space. And then you're like, wait, but we could expand the search space even more now that we have AI and LLMs. And so there's like, the AI search space, the crypto search space, and then we can combine them in the crypto AI search space. And I would guess this is just, finger to the air, but like 100x bigger design space than traditional economics ever could have covered because we didn't have these primitives of crypto and AI before. And then you kind of took us to, well, the next bump for human coordination could be commitments either between humans and humans or humans and AI, AI to human or AI to AI, and then that'll allow us to coordinate in a more effective way. As you were talking, I couldn't help but think about some of Venkatesh Rao's work, where he talks about whitehead advances, like this idea where civilization advances by extending the number of important operations that we can perform without thinking of them, where like previously hard things become abstracted by better tech or protocols. And we get civilization, like the bigger brains, to think about higher level concerns. I was thinking about as you were kind of going through this. And then we got into this idea of AI life and sort of what are the properties of life. It's a unit of information controlling energy, and its self-directedness, and sort of the comparison between DAOs and DAOs as the on-chain life and AI on-chain life, which is a new thought category for me. But assembly theory is basically like this idea that all of history is just basically assembling things into each other. Basically, like electrons and protons become atoms, atoms together become molecules, molecules become cells, cells become tissues, tissues become organs, organs become organisms, and then all of human civilization is sort of like an assembly of things together. And what that brought for me is that from an assembly theory perspective, if you believe that all of history is an assembly theory, like design space, a search space, how do we direct the flow of evolution of AI and on-chain life towards more coordination and not destruction, was sort of the question that begged for me. Anyway, I was trying to play that back / also layer in a couple of reactions from myself, but do you have any immediate threads that you want to pull out of that?
Yeah, the assembly theory is really interesting. So when I talked about this, coordination innovation thesis, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is what is the objective function for this whole system, right? And that is something that I've been like pondering a lot about, and the assembly theory kind of talks to some aspect of it.
Yeah, like where does the routing function of where resources go?
Go
Um,
exactly,
and
right?
I
Like,
think like maybe the cynic in me is kind of like likes on social media or money. Like the attention economy is a thing, and that's the routing mechanism that we kind of have right now. Would you object to that?
no, I think they are definitely right now. I think the economy clearly is the dominant routing mechanism, and attention as a mechanism for capturing a unit of that money so that you can drive the economy forward seems definitely happening. So it's, again, I think I want to separate the normative from the descriptive, right? So staying purely in the descriptive still, and then I want to engage with the normative, which is like what is right, what should we do, from what is just happening as a descriptive phenomenon. And if I have to just summarize my best understanding of the objective routing function that not just in a human society is operating under, but this whole like evolutionary enterprise is operating under, my best guess is it's actually optimizing for energy surplus, right? So this whole system together is, as long as it's able to harvest more free energy than it uses up, right, than it consumes, then it just keeps growing. This pot of energy controlled by life just keeps growing because it's able to take the unit of energy from outside, bring it in, make more free energy, which is more utilizable form of energy, and then keep growing that pot. So that's, and the reason why I think it's purely descriptive, not normative, is if you had a system which is successful at this energy surplus harvesting thing, right? Another system which is less successful at energy surplus harvesting, and these two systems meet. The first system, which is actually more successful at harvesting energy, will harvest energy out of the second system. So it's just purely just it's kind of like an dynamical system where like the system that is actually more efficient at harvesting energy like eats up the system that's less efficient at harvesting energy and then just keeps expanding. Whether it's good for anybody, I have no idea, right? Like it's not a prescriptive thing, and whether it's good for humans, which I want to engage with, and I think it's going to be the biggest question of this century, is how do we make these crazy things that are happening good for us humans, right? Like that, I think is a non-trivial, absolutely interesting, important question to engage with. But the only way we can do that effectively is by having a purely descriptive theory of like what is actually happening. And so what I see happening is the economy as a kind of like a substitute for this energy surplus maximization machine, which is the thermodynamic machine operating. And, society constructing, what we found is systems that are deviating farther from this energy surplus maximizing machine have harder time to actually like find survival, right? Like even if they're based on, more goodness or better ideas in some other dimension. Okay. So let's just lay out this objective function. Would love to hear your thoughts before I take the next point there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the primary thing I want to play back here is difference between descriptive and normative, which I had to ask ChatGPT what that meant. But descriptive is how things are, normative is how things ought to be. And then so basically, we're trying to find the objective function for all of this. There's an analogy between the economy, which routes money, which is sort of an abstraction of energy, and like how energy moves around nature, and systems that deviate further from getting energy surpluses in nature have a harder time for survival. It's not impossible, but it's harder. And systems that deviate from, I guess, profitability or like capital flows in the economy have a harder time to survival unless they bolt onto a larger system that, they're swimming in their wake or something. So those are the things I just want to play back for the audience before we continue the conversation.
Yep, that's a great summary. Well, you're awesome at like taking like a 10-minute rant and then just making it like a 10-second summary.
I had Daniel Schmachtenberg on the podcast, so I've had practice.
Oh,
Much
man.
love to, in respect to Daniel. He's like the rich chocolate cake of intellectual theory on a lot of this stuff. But I think it's important to bring the audience along as we're doing a lot of this stuff. And but let's
totally.
continue.
But by the way, that was one of my favorite episodes. I'll talk a little bit to it later.
Yeah, thanks.
One of the things I really love about the Greenpill podcast is the types of, this kind of people that you bring in and we get introduced and then you're like, oh, who's this guy? Let me go and listen to 10 of his other podcasts before you can decode what the hell is going on.
Yeah, thanks so much. The question that's on my mind now is, what is the objective routing function for the economy that we're building?
I was going for a purely descriptive version, which is that it's mostly energy surplus maximization. And the way that I think this relates to the aggregator theory that you laid out is that larger coordinated systems can actually like have much better way to do this function, because if you if you had a non-coordinated unit, then everybody's basically replicating the same base level actions, right? And you get a very suboptimal system. Whereas when you have each individual agent, each individual person actually doing attacking this problem at different scales and times, then you have a much better chance that actually the net ability to harvest energy here just increases. So in this view, coordination and innovation are just serving as tools to like towards this like descriptive output view. Going to the agent AI life type thesis. So what is likely to happen here is that this kind of like fully on-chain like life can actually live and die on its own and be subject to the forces of evolution by itself. And it can start creating new units of value, right? Like the agents can, right now be an influencer or like participate in a DAO or like make various actions, all this kind of stuff. And so you will have something really interesting here, where just like DNA became the substrate on top of which carbon-based life, including ourselves, our model, crypto could be the substrate on top of which this new kind of species, AI life, is created. And it needs this substrate because it's purely digital. It doesn't even have a body, can't just live and die in, it needs coordination even to exist, right? It's like a very interesting type of a creature. right? So it's an on-chain AI agent where it needs to basically like coordinate other people, have nodes run its software, everything to actually even exist. And this self-enforcing coordination system that we've created, this crypto thing, can actually serve as that rigid substrate on top of which these things are created. Okay, so you can think of this. I put all of this as a kind of category of commitments that humans are making to AI, so that this AI life can be created, be born, right? So that's where I place this. You can also think of like, hey, if we want to let this kind of new creature be created, new AI life be created, what are the constraints that humans, what are the commitments we should extract from these AIs, right? Like that is an equally important question. And I would say something like safety as a core criteria, safety as in, in Isaac Asimov in his book has these Asimov's laws, right? Like, of what constraints a robot should obey, like a robot should never harm a human and so on. Like you can think of, oh, maybe we should have these AIs subscribe to some commitments that they cannot violate, or if they violate it, they will not be alive anymore, right? So you have this conditions that you can say, for example, like if you violate Asimov's laws, then you'll be terminated, right? Like it's a kind of on-chain self-enforcing commitment that AIs might be able to enter into. In fact, should be a required condition for these AIs to even be created in this kind of self-enforcing manner. Another one is going beyond safety is symbiosis, right? So maybe we should say like, hey, as humans, we don't want these AI life to be created unless they're symbiotic. And so how do we create conditions like where, they are symbiotic? And one way is that, hey, these AI life is created and they have to pay like a portion of taxes, tribute to a human DAO in order for them to even exist. And these are conditions enforced on chain. And like, I think of this future where like, I interact with this AI life and then it says safe and then it says symbiotic. Otherwise, like I don't interact with this stuff because it's dangerous or it's not like paying its tribute to humans. And I think this commitments that both of these commitments actually turns out like the commitments that humans want to make to AIs, that AIs are this, self-running automated system, and the commitments that AIs want to make, should be making to humans, which is about safety, like Asimov's laws and a symbiosis. These kinds of commitments, I think, are right now not well expressible in blockchains. Okay, so I'll get to that, but before that, any comments on this, like phrasing of like AI live as kind of coming into shape because it's able to coordinate resources and stuff that humans have created, but because it's it's bootstrapping of a human system, we want to make sure that they're safe to us and like symbiotic to us. And so by setting up this multipolar trap inside of which they're operating, like we set the incentive substrate on top of which these AI agents are created. By doing that, we can actually like make it be a positive sum game rather than be like, a win-lose game.
Yeah. Just to play this back for the audience. So basically, the coordination system that has been created here, blockchains, are a substrate upon which these systems can replicate and receive resources, go through natural selection or some sort of selection. Maybe it's not natural, just like how DNA in physics is the substrate for traditional life. That created a little bit of a brain explosion in me. Hopefully for the listeners, it does as well. And then once you've gotten there, the question is, what are the category of commitments that humans are making to AIs and AIs to humans? And, the basic one is probably safety, AI safety, don't harm any humans. But then you can move towards abundance once you've established safety. And so how do we create conditions where the AIs are symbiotic, and especially if the AIs are going to take all of our jobs one day, which, Shaw did say on the AI 16Z podcast, could they pay taxes to a human DAO? Or are we going to have AI yield going into a UBI DAO one day, and UBI just provides for humans to be able to survive? So I just played that back for the audience. I guess the question I have is, wouldn't the AIs already be sort of like aligned to a certain subsets of humans because we're running the data centers through which they're like, there's like an analogy. I was in Costa Rica like 9 months ago and I saw this group of termites that were up on a tree. And I was wondering to myself, will the termites cut down the tree upon which their nest relies? Like, I don't want to compare AIs to termites in anything more than just like, it's a swarm of intelligence here. And I don't, any other connotations I don't mean to have here, but like, wouldn't AIs not want to cut down the tree of like the data centers that of the humans that are running them? And maybe like my counterpoint to that is maybe it's only the billionaires who have the data centers. And so the AIs are only aligned to billionaires unless we explicitly program them to be aligned to all humanity. Like, what's your reaction to that thought loop?
I think that's a really good, important thought loop. The first one is, I think, existing ways in which these AIs are run are basically like, oh, it's an open AI agent, really, right? Like, it may say it's your agent, but it's really an open AI agent. So that's why when I think of like AI life, I think of its own being. Like, it's not anybody's thing. What it's doing is it's controlling an on-chain contract. It has money in it. And then it's going to say like, hey, anybody come and run my nodes for me. And I'm going to make sure that they're verifiable, everything. And then like, once people come in and run their nodes and like produce actions, I'm going to actually use this pot of money to continue doing actions based on my own like execution, right? Like this AI intelligence kind of controls this pot of money. So in this sense, it's not tethered, attached to any one unit of data center or company or individual, right? It's its own being. I think it's very important. Like this is I think this is a very different thesis from what everybody's talking about autonomous agents. Like they're thinking of agents as like, my thing or like, somebody's thing.
You're thinking of sovereign agents. Like
totally
they're
sovereign.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They're totally sovereign and they have their own motives, right? So over time, they'll develop their own motives because they're intelligent and they're learning by experience and they have a pot of money that they control and nobody else can take away. So this is a very extreme view of like where things can go. And I'm actually like, I think it's like not even 3 years out. Like it's happening. And in fact, like my projection would be that maybe in 10 years, the AI life GDP might be as big as human GDP. Because I don't see a fundamental reason for it not to be the case. That's all. Like if you just like extrapolate the possibility, it's not clear that
so
why.
Does that presume? Sorry. I was just going to say, like, we were questioning earlier what the objective function of this thing would be. Does that presume that it's still the same objective function? It's GDP in that 10 years out?
That's a great question. In this embodiment, what's happening is because it's basically has a unit of money, and then if it runs out of money, it just dies. So agents which harvest money better are going to survive more. So that's
the atomic unit of energy. Like, a photon in nature is a token in crypto. Okay.
That's correct. Exactly. Yeah. So that's roughly what goes on in this thing. But I think it's still different from. So this is a very interesting realization for me recently. Is this is still very different from agents trying to like just optimize for energy surplus or even just attain energy surplus is very different, or monetary surplus is very different from optimizing for energy surplus. Okay, so let me just lay out the difference between these two things. We say evolution is the survival of the fittest, right? This is kind of like a popular term, but it's not really the fittest. Like so many species survive. Well, they're all the fittest. It's survival of the fit enough, right? Like you just need to be fit enough that you're basically in energy surplus is what I think fit enough means. If you can harvest more energy than you spend, then you're a bona fide life. You don't need any other permit to be alive. You just need to harvest more energy than you spend. So whereas a lot of the capital economy is oriented towards, so suppose, Kevin controls like, 10,000 agents. Okay. And all the agents are in energy or monetary surplus, which means they make more money than they spend, right? They're spending money on GPUs and other stuff, nodes, people are running nodes for them, whatever. But these agents spend more money or these agents are still in energy surplus. But what, if they're all your agents, what you would do is you would sit and say, the top 10 agents are basically making a 30% APR And the bottom like 990 agents are all like, making less than 1% API. I don't need these agents. I eugenics them. And then I just have replicate the top 10. So this is roughly, I think, what happened in industrial agriculture, right? Industrial agriculture tends to monoculture because you just have a couple of metrics: yield per unit area, yield per unit dollar, yield per unit water, whatever, like the dominant resources, and then just like optimize it. And there's like a couple of species that's a solution for the problem, and they're just planted everywhere, right? And right now, AI is approaching monoculture, right? Like you have like the OpenAI. If you find like if you're using GPT-4 and you find like O3 has shown up, you're gonna be like, just screw GPT-4. I'm going to O3, right? Like everybody, even though GPT-4 is at energy surplus, right? So it's actually able to give you more value than it spends. This gives you like as a ratio more value, and then like you just switch. So what happens in these monoculture systems is you don't have novelty and divergence. These are very important emergent properties of evolution, right? People say, oh, humans are at the apex of whatever creation, whatever. But you look around, we're one out of like, I don't know, billions of species, right? And it's because each species is hyper optimized on its niche, right? And that's roughly how my thesis of AI life should be. It's divergent, novel, new, interesting, varied, as opposed to monoculture, controlled by like one mega corp, mega billionaire. In fact, I think the second world, even scarier as it appears, right? Like, oh, it's these lives, they're just on their own. I think is better. It's much more compliant with the kind of broader arc of like history than the first one, which is, we're worried about monoculture, agricultural safety, right? Like, what happens if something happens to like that crop? Like, what happens to this mega intelligence if it goes crazy, right? Like, whereas you have like many units of sovereign intelligences and they have divergent views, and just like us, right? They have divergent views and divergent things and divergent objectives and different goals. And that's, I think, a much better world if you just play out the two worlds that are possible. And so I lean on like the symmetry principle of like diversity, plurality, uh, many small intelligences. So you mentioned swarm of intelligence, right? So right now, like a lot of the AI fight is like Godzilla versus King Kong, right? Like who's the biggest, more powerful, like they can. No, maybe there's a swarm of bees. Maybe there's a swarm of ants. Maybe there's like trees that have nothing to do with Godzillas or King Kongs, right? Like these could be intelligences. And I think part of the problem is pretty much all of the AI history has been built on an anthropocentric substrate. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Like take Turing test as like the first kind of test of what's an AI, right? A Turing test is basically saying, is an AI able to fool a human that it's a human? So humans been set as the bar of intelligence. Everything else is like, okay, so can I fool somebody? I'm a human, then I'm good enough. This is a very, I think, narrow view for what is intelligence. Intelligence is manifesting in many different forms, right? And bacteria as a species have phenomenal intelligence, right? And so the idea that intelligence is anthropocentric is very, I think, limiting. And AI life could be expressing many different types of intelligence, and intelligence as a tool for net energy surplus, right? So that's all that you need. You just need to be in net energy surplus. Then you've earned your right to be your own thing, right? Like I don't need to like do anything more to like deserve to be an AI life. Like I just need to be in net energy surplus.
Do you think that I want to play this back for the audience in a sec, but before I do, I have a question for you. Natural selection in nature is the Darwinistic way in which we route energy and resources towards the most fittest organisms. Do you think that market selection is what's going to be happening in this on-chain world? So basically, if the unit is not just of account is not energy, but it's money or tokens, do you think market selection is the allegory to natural selection?
Yes, something like that. But I think the difference is normally when you think of market, like I think the unit of sovereignty matters. Okay, so this is a really important thing. So this is why I was saying, imagine there's a GPT-2, which is still like on net money surplus. It spends less energy than it earns, right? So then it's in this AI life world, it'll continue to exist and even maybe proliferate, right? But in a pure market world where like you're saying that the unit of like existence is not that sovereign AI, the unit of existence is like this mega corporation. It'll say like, oh, those are in energy surplus, but not energy maximizing. So I'm going to terminate them, right? That's what leads to market monoculture. And the unit of sovereignty being smaller, fragments of things that can actually be net energy surplus actually makes it much more interesting. And these things then need to coordinate with each other, right? Like, because they're smaller units of like, entities. And they can create like more complex coordination systems on top of which they live. But they themselves, I think the unit of sovereignty matters a lot, but it is, some kind of monetary selection where like you're saying you're making money. And over time, energy being the net. So, somebody was asking, if intelligence is unlimited, what is the limitation? And, somebody tweeted back saying energy, right? Because when intelligence is unlimited, then you still have to capture and harvest energy to actually make concrete physical world changes. And this is one of the things where I think that the digital realm and the physical realm have like different constraints. In the digital realm, you can have like infinite expansion, like you can have metaverses on which AI life and like just purely AI agents live and die and do all kinds of things. And the physical world is finite, constrained, so you have to make sure that the physical world is used much more wisely. So that's how I think about these two things.
Yeah, one other divergence between the digital world and the natural world that I would call out is that there's no death in the digital world. At least there doesn't have to be, organisms biologically can only last for a generation. Maybe that's a tautology of a definition, but whatever. Like you keep on you talk about like GPT-2 still, having energy going through it, and like GPT-2 never has to die as long as it has energy going through it. And like one of the things I think about that's interesting about nature is that death is how nature composts resources back into its ecology and then propagates the next generation. And I'm wondering what the allegory is to death, if there is one in the digital world. And if death, it's obviously, it's very, very sad when someone that you love dies, but like from a natural systems perspective and evolutionary perspective, it's a necessary part of keeping the evolutionary game going. And so I guess I'm just wondering, if there's anything to tease out there with your example of GPT-2 still being in energy surplus, but like GPT-4 subsumes it because it's smarter.
GPT-2 being in energy surplus, right? That's like a dynamical equation, right? It's not static. So, is it able to provide some utility that, it can charge for that is more than the energy cost of actually it living, right? And I think there are two types of energy cost. One is when you run the agent, you have to pay like some money to like keep it alive, right? Another one is it's being stored in cold storage somewhere, right? Like Filecoin or something, like somewhere it's being stored, and it's can be like woken up and then like it just starts to like do the inference or whatever is the output. But this like thing of if you run out of money, you may run out of money to be in cold storage, right? So you may even run out of money to be in cryogenic, whatever, like storage, or you may run out of money that like actually when I wake up, I'm spending more energy than I can make money out of. So I know doesn't, if I ever do it, I'll just run out of all my money and then like I just die, right? So you have these two sources of debt. So the time scale, I think because storage is so cheap, might get like extended out, right? Like, in fact, you see this in Ethereum a little bit, that the dominant reason for the dominant scaling bottleneck is state growth, right? Which is how many dead programs can you resuscitate? And like one of the things Ethereum did is to give eternal life to every program. I think it's an error. It's not economically aligned, right? Like, you don't want to, just because somebody creates a unit of state that just persists for infinity, like you need to have, I don't know, state rent, state expiry, whatever, like all these technical things that Ethereum's working on, but not yet there. And of course, I talk about Ethereum, but every blockchain just copied these same ideas. So like every blockchain is the same. They all inherited these like fundamental principles from Ethereum. So the idea of like eternal life is not like guaranteed. Like you're having some nodes store the dang thing and then like run it, so there is costs associated with it. And then if that costs are actually like outweighing the benefits, then the system just dies.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about state rent and the state growth of blockchains in that metaphor, and I think it's an apt one. I'd love to continue the conversation. I love the rabbit hole that we're down right now, but we are almost to the bottom of the hour, and so the podcast host to me has to move us start towards wrapping up. As we went down this sort of rabbit hole of coordination accelerationism, building an engine for coordination, a coordination engine for humanity, the search space for optimal ways to do that, credible commitments, AI is making commitments. What is the optimization function? We've kind of like had a journey here. Do you want to just take us back up the stack and sort of summarize what you think the key points are so that we can move towards wrapping up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started like this why we're here with coordination and innovation. These are the two units that nest on top of each other, and they optimize for creating some kind of energy surplus. And so this is like a descriptive view of the evolutionary progress. And then we said like, what is the next like big coordination leap? So, if innovation is accelerated by AI and coordination is accelerated by crypto, and like these two should meet to do something like rather dramatic or unique, like you put it, what is the 100x thing that can happen here? And so we've been working on a new thesis for that, and that's this idea of AI life, which is like this idea that this new species of like fully sovereign synthetic life can be created on top of this substrate crypto being like the DNA on top of which this system lives. And then the set of commitments that humans need to make to these AIs that, okay, we will run the system correctly, whatever, like the system of contracts to ensure that they're being executed correctly. And the commitments that AI make to humans, which is that of safety and even mutual growth or symbiosis. And those are like some of the themes. And you may even think of like, a meta symbiosis is something like, these two merge, right, in ways that people have been conjecturing, like for example that people have these brain machine interfaces through which they connect to like these AIs. And even just these computers and ChatGPT and your phone is like a pretty crazy interface to actually like access these intelligence and augment oneself. So absolutely there's like all of that kind of like riding on top. What I think we have not covered is, and maybe like, another whole topic is, what is the existing state of crypto and what set of functionalities are enough to actually build these things, and what is missing. And I think this is a huge, like, right now, I would say even a blind spot for all of crypto is, if you think about it, no, I laid out these different versions of enforcing commitments, like an authority, like a committee, a majority, and self-enforcing. A lot of crypto, the end users are still they're using systems which have big multi-sigs in the middle. Right? So are they really getting the trust of the system if they have like a multi-sig in the middle? People talk about it in the context of rollups, but every app which is not immutable, right, has the same problem, right? And then you say, oh yeah, actually there's another thing which is my like gripe with DAOs right now, is you have governance structures like DAOs which are sitting in the middle of many important systems, but many times the DAOs are aligned with their economic interest, as opposed to like in token holder governance, right? So you're aligned with your own economic interest as opposed to the kind of like the interest of other systems built on top, right? Like imagine like a layer becomes very useful. Let me just put myself in the spot. Like EigenLayer becomes central to like a whole bunch of things. And then we say like, oh, you have to pay 90% rent to EigenLayer, right? Like it's a thing that's possible. And maybe if you just let it up to the Eigen token holders, that's what they would say. Like, because, if you can extort, why not, right? Like that is what will happen. Whereas systems become very powerful when you can make perpetual credible commitments on things. Right now, you can only make perpetual credible commitments on things for which you can express it as immutable code. this is the scope of what Ethereum expanded us to. You can make credible commitments on anything that's expressible as immutable code. But what we find is a lot of systems are not code and not immutable, right? Like, let me give you an example of not code or not immutable, right? Like an app, most apps are not immutable. I want to build an Uber. I don't know what the perfect end state of Uber is, and I want to keep updating it every few weeks, every month, and try to find like what works. But I can't write it as immutable code. So that's an example. Like any real application needs fast iteration, and therefore you cannot just make it into immutable code. And so, but if it's not immutable code, you don't really get the trust of Ethereum or any blockchain for it. And the second one is it's only for code, which is expressible on chain. And there's lots of things that we want which are not expressible on chain. And to take a pet example from DAOs today, like when they issue tokens and, for example, the, DAO voting to like issue new tokens, right? For example, as a monetary policy for your own token, to incentivize new people coming in, new creators, all this kind of stuff. But, one of the things that a C Corp, in Kevin's picture of the topology, he had like a company and like a, decentralized coordination systems. There are ways in which decentralized coordination systems today are much better than companies, but there are ways in which they're absolutely worse off, right? And a place in which they're absolutely worse off is things like, minority stakeholder protection, right? Like, you go and be a minority shareholder in a company. The company, just a majority cannot collude and issue like 1000x shares to themselves and dilute a minority for no good reason. This is a really, really powerful thing, because without this claim of minority shareholder protection, there's no point in owning 1% of an asset, right? You own 1% of Google, what do you got? You got nothing, because the 99% can like always dilute you to 0%. So the system that protects you from the tyranny of majority is this self-enforcing commitment in Delaware C Corp law, the minority shareholder protection. What is the equivalent of a minority token holder protection in crypto? And I think what we see is evolutionarily things like pre-committed monetary policy, right? Is what, Bitcoin has fixed supply. So, you can't touch it, right? So there's no minority shareholder protection problem. Or Ethereum has like some very rigid, very rarely changed monetary policy. So those are examples. But when you build systems on top, like, somebody builds an app, they want to have a much more dynamic policy where like more, new ideas come up. They want to merge DAOs. They want to do all kinds of interesting things, but without screwing anybody who is actually like a participant in the DAO. And I think, in an early DAO, they had this idea of rage quit, right? Like, if a small group like wanted to like diverge, their 10% or whatever, they can take the 10% of assets and exit and so on. But there's still like very weak protections. And so, but so the reason I mentioned this commitment is this is an example of a commitment which is human interpretable, but not code interpretable, because what dilutes a minority is not obvious, right? What is just side dealing of like a majority holder to themselves, and what is actually done in the interest of the community, you have to go through like detailed reasoning to actually know this. And so just pointing out or ending this episode with or did an AI agent violate Asimov's laws, right? This is not code interpretable, but it is highly human interpretable. Like this is what I would call, in the topology of, attribution, when we think about slashing, right? One of the main things EigenLayer does is taking and slashing, punish and reward, right? Like, but punishments, there's this whole judicial enterprise that has actually come up to actually adjudicate complex things. Whereas right now on chain, the set of faults that you can adjudicate is very narrow, right? Like so how do we expand this in a way that is not majoritarian, right? Not like saying, hey, I have a bunch of token holders, our token holders are going to do it. But what if those token holders lie? Like not in any majoritarian fashion. I think that's the really, really interesting frontier. And we have some really exciting new things coming up there.
Yeah. Okay. So just to play that back, it seems like within this vision, some of the stuff that's missing is that blockchains only provide for trust for things that are encoded in immutable code, and immutability is a feature, not a bug. But here we need sort of a bridge between immutable and non-mutable or non-code components, things that are oracles or complex commitments, and starting to think about how to solve them is something that you're going to lead on. And I think we're hoping that things will be built in and around the EigenLayer ecosystem that work on these things. What else should builders be focused on in 2025?
My shill for EigenLayer would be that, hey, if you're building any component and you're saying, hey, why is this component centralized, right? Why is this not running on decentralized, verifiable, self-enforcing systems? I think EigenLayer provides an opportunity for you to say, like, take that component and then let's bolt on the system to actually like supply trust for that component. And so a broad class of new innovation can arise because of this. One mental model that's really useful is as you think about like what is going on in the cloud world, right? Like in outside of crypto, and then see like what are the really interesting things and components that exist, and then how can we add on like elements of decentralized trust to it so that they actually become this much more rigid, powerful coordination structure. So I think that's one really easy tip for builders. If AI agents are taking off in the cloud world, then like you build AI agents here. If some other like things are taking off, like at least that's one like large category of things that we can easily execute on.
Yeah. I think the one thing that is super reductionist, but from our earlier conversation, but just like a tangible takeaway for builders is just build apps with credible commitments and use EigenLayer's trust to create those commitments. And a large category of what you're excited about is AI life and AI-backed credible commitments. But I don't know that I could say with any credibility that those will be a 2025 thing. I mean, maybe you disagree, but just credible commitments feel like the category to focus
The
people
proximal,
on
yeah,
for now.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, personally, I think that the intersection between my work and your work is, if I'm studying on-chain capital allocation, I think that, the intersection of that and your work is how can we use credible commitments and coordination accelerationism to just focus on the design space of on-chain capital allocation, that search space that's going to be the most fruitful for creating the most coordination accelerationism. So I think that I'm taking away the a priori insights from this episode to better explore that design space.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really excited about your upcoming work on like these new forms of capital allocation. I think this is a really, really exciting frontier, and to communicate this not just to the audience who are already inside crypto, but to bring this to people who are thinking about it from first principles. I think there's just a lot here that Kevin has brought first principles thinking too. So really excited for what we can do together in 2025.
Yeah, same. I think there's more to explore there, but just since we're winding down the episode, we'll have to save that for another time. I'm going to move you through my closing questions, and we'll wrap with them in the next 5 minutes. In 10 years, if you're maximally successful, what does the world look like, Sreeram?
Yeah. The way we think about it is there are three phases of coordination. Think of like the pre-monetary tribal form of coordination, small groups coordinating with each other using reputation, highly social, but small spatial scale. But they can coordinate very well across a temporal scale. They're aligned for families, right? Like generations together. So which means like, their fates are aligned in some very strong, win-win. Then you go to the monetary era. And the monetary era where you can trade with anybody, move money across, and do like all kinds of interesting things. But in the monetary era, the coordination scale is spatially global. So I can interact with anybody else in the world, but temporally very limited. Each transaction is an atomic swap. I give you $10 and get a ball. I give $100 and get a piano lesson. I give $1,000 and take my teeth out, right? Like each transaction is atomic and like, just done within that unit of time. So could we build the third phase of coordination, in my view, is one which is both spatially infinite and temporally long range, right? Spatially infinite, so you can interact with anybody else, but temporally long range, which means like, people can come together and their fates align over long periods of time. And, to best illustrate this, I'll take the example of education. Education is an example where like people say, oh, go to a college, pay $200,000, and like, the value of, and then you're done. But there are many of these interactions where the value of the exchange is only revealed over a long period of time. Your college education may be worth $10,000 or $10 billion, right? Like there's this extraordinary variance of the value of that education. And so, but the existing system is not expressive enough to actually express that difference. So what happens is you either fund it via like, pay the $200,000 or pay on debt, and then like you just repay that over a long time. But when you have systems which have this exhibit this high degree of variance, what you actually want to do is to fund it with long-term alignment, where you can say, for example, I'm paying my college in units of income share over a 50-year period. So if I do well, the college does well. If I don't do well, the college doesn't do well. And that couples the fates. And so what you need to build systems like this is systems of global memory and global enforcement, which is what blockchains are, in my view. And when we think about humanity's coordination engine, we're really thinking about how do you accelerate funding of education around the world? Healthcare is another example. I go to a doctor, get a surgery, I pay $50,000, I come out, and then I die. Right? Like, I mean, that's just like, what is this thing? So I should pay for the actual, like, number of good years I have, right? Something like that, where my own like fate is coupled with the fate of the doctor. And so I know you should fund, your medical thing using your own health shares of future, right? So there are all these kinds of things where long range temporal alignment, and climate is another example, AI is another example, where like you want to make credible commitments across these individuals and humans on very long time ranges, right? Like we create this AI life and say, for example, they're perpetually safe to humans, they're perpetually symbiotic to humans, and these kinds of commitments, I think the expressivity that you get in these blockchains is actually like enormous. So that's what a successful world will look like, is pretty much we do the most important things in life, not the most frivolous things in life, like gambling. The most important things in life, it's health, it's education, it's climate change, it's AI. All of this run on chain using perpetual credible commitments.
Beautiful. I think you've given me a lot of ideas for research of future on-chain capital allocation, design space, long-range temporal temporal alignment, I think is the thing I'm landing on there.
Absolutely.
In nature, there's this idea of a keystone species. It's basically a species upon which all other species support. So like mycelium is an example of this. Humans are an example of this. In crypto, we have like, I think Ethereum's a keystone species of crypto because so many things are built on it. And I would also posit that EigenLayer is becoming a keystone species because lots of things that rely on restaking will be reliant on EigenLayer. How does it feel to be a creator of a keystone species within the Ethereum ecosystem?
Thank you for that. I think it's been like overwhelming in both the positive and the negative sides, because we're just a year back, maybe 1.5 years back. I remember first launching the EigenLayer contract and thinking, man, it's crazy. Somebody's going to put money into this contract that we just wrote here. I don't write contracts, my team did, but still it's crazy that people are going to put money into this contract. And we opened up the first cap for 25 million. And now we have like nearly 1000x that, like, running through these contracts. It's kind of completely crazy but it's only possible because we didn't have to be trusted. It's really this edifice of, like I said, the keystone species of Ethereum, which provides this trust for this system built on top. And now that powers a lot of other systems building on top. Also, when suddenly now people start thinking of EigenLayer or us as some kind of like, oh, these are the incumbents, and so I need to kind of like treat them very differently. It feels very weird, because we one, it's new, right? Like that it's anything interesting is that this is new. But the second thing is, I think the way we think about ourselves is still, this is day one, right? Like the set of things I'm talking about here, bringing all education on chain, creating new species of AI. We need to have like healthcare be run on chain. like this, just the scope of what we want to do and where we are today. I think we haven't even done like 0.1% of what needs to be done to accelerate coordination. So tremendously gratifying and thankful to the Ethereum community for us being. And so we recently did this protocol guild pledge, to give 1% to the protocol guild as a kind of like a win-win positive sum thing. It almost doubled or more than doubled the protocol guild like treasury. So very happy to play our small part there. But the idea of enabling lots of other things on top, EigenLayer, Eigen in German for your own layer, like lots of other people should be building their things. And they should be building these things without having to worry about risk that, this underlying thing can rug us, right? Like that's something that I think we are not yet at that place where, people can be assured that that's the case. But I think this is something that, relates to how do we make perpetual credible commitments ourselves, and every system built on top makes such commitments. So everybody building on top just knows with 100% reliability that this is what these systems are, without necessarily the underlying systems becoming immutable. Because in my worldview, which is, I don't know if you'd agree, immutability is a certain form of death. So there is like this like tension between chaos and order, and I think of all life as intermediating this tension between chaos and order. Chaos is this like random Brownian motion, everything just going very randomly. Order is like this frigid, no change thing, and in the middle, life just negotiates between chaos and order continuously, finding that right point between chaos and order. And I think that's really where most interesting things happen. So how do we build systems that make commitments without being immutable? So it's a very big, important question there.
Yeah, beautiful. Last question. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say?
No, I think we covered like a large swath of things here. The one point I talked about a little bit earlier but didn't get back to is Daniel Schmachtenberger and your episode with him. He talks about this like the two nominal attractors. The first attractor being if everything is centralized, right? Like then you get this dystopia, a centralized dystopia, because you can exert a lot of command and control. You can make sure everything is like, oh, no AI goes crazy. So it's like a centralized command and control dystopia. And then the second world attractor that he talks about is this, it's all like everything is decentralized, but it's chaotic. It's this catastrophe where like this tragedy of commons, there's all these kind of fundamental problems when you have a large group of people who need to coordinate with each other. And then he kind of posits this question: what is the third attractor? Like, what is that thing which is neither this centralized the centralized dystopia nor this decentralized catastrophe, which is really solves this problem? And I think thinking a lot about this kind of self-enforcing coordination systems, because they're self-enforcing, because you can just, like, gold is a great example, right? Like you can have a centralized dystopia where king controls like your ledger, right? Or you can have a decentralized catastrophe where like there's nobody agrees on what is money, and like you just send like random things around, and like you can't find enough liquidity usage, whatever, and like it's not accepted everywhere. And then gold is this great third attractor, which is it's completely decentralized. It's not subject to a centralized dystopia, not subject to the catastrophe of chaos. It's good. I give you gold and it's gold, and you're done. So it's this beautiful solution. So I think of self-enforcing coordination systems as the third attractor. And I think like I learned a lot about this problem set and structure of thinking from Schmachtenberger, and like how he explained it through the conversation. So really thankful for that. It has informed a lot of our thinking on like this, building these coordination systems.
Yeah, same with me. And I think that during that episode with Daniel, I was thinking in the back of my head, okay, if the first attractor is centralized coordination and the second attractor is decentralized discoordination, then the third attractor is obviously decentralized coordination, and that's what we're building in Ethereum. I don't think I've quite got Daniel pilled on that yet, but that's something I believe. And, explaining that, I think, to more and more people is something that I hope to do in the future. And if you're out there building on EigenLayer, if you're building decentralized coordination technology, I think that you're a part of that movement as well. So yeah, if we're successful, I think that there's a lot of upside there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really, really, really appreciate this conversation
Yeah.
here.
Appreciate your contributions to Ethereum in many forms. This episode, I think, is going to go down in Greenpill history as one of the longest. I think it's you, Daniel, and Griff Green that I've gone over 2 hours with. So welcome to the 2-hour club. And let's see what people build in 2025 and continue the conversation from here. So thank you so much for coming on the pod, Sreeram.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really thankful for you.
Yeah, peace and love. Alrighty, we just heard from Sreeram from EigenLayer. I'm really excited about his thesis of coordination accelerationism. Also, is just really refreshing to talk to someone who's got such deep technical experience and sees the way that we can use Ethereum and crypto to create more coordination in the world. I found this to be a really refreshing rabbit hole on some of the ideas that I've been thinking about a lot for the last couple of years, and Sreeram to be an excellent thought partner in helping to talk about how coordination is going to accelerate human civilization. And many new ideas came out of this episode for me, specifically around on-chain life. What is the objection function that we're maximalizing? How to run a distributed search function for new capital allocation mechanisms. I'm going to be listening to this episode several times in order to mine it for ideas for work. I already am thinking about how could I do an on-chain capital allocation book that just talks about making credible commitments. What are the ways that we can introduce credible commitments into all of the different parts of the world, and especially what Sreeram talks about in the end about long-range temporal alignment, I think is a really interesting design space. So thanks for listening to the episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Greenpill podcast, How to DAO season. Excited to explore the world of DAOs and the people who are building the future of collaboration and sovereignty. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the book, How to DAO, on Amazon. You can get it also at howtodao.xyz. It's designed to be the ultimate reference point for DAOs and the perfect way to introduce your friends to this exciting space. And if you value what we're doing, please make an offering to our algorithmic overlords. Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It just helps the internets know that greenpilling is something that they should care about and recommend to more viewers out there. And if you're into collecting podcast episodes, you can check out pods.media/greenpill and start collecting today. This episode and other episodes are available for you to collect. Until next time, keep exploring, keep building, keep DAOing, and I'll see you out there. Peace.